Three, two, one. Welcome everyone to episode 2 of Searching for a Meaning podcast with myself, Richard Glover. The podcast is talking to creatives about what they do, why they do it, and what challenges and difficulties they've had to overcome. And hopefully, those of you who are listening to this, you'll be inspired to, you know, and something will resonate with you, and you'll be able to find what it is that you want to do and how to achieve that. Today's guest is a Scottish folk singer from Aberdeenshire. She's one of Scotland's finest ballad singers who's rooted deeply in the traditions of Scotland's northeast. She was Scotland's Singer of the Year at the MG Alba Scots Traditional Music Awards in 2018 and has been described as one of the best that Scotland has to offer. So it's my delight to welcome Iona Fyfe to today's podcast. Iona, welcome, and thank you very much for joining us. How are you?
Thank you very much for having me, Richard. Yeah, good. The sun is shining in Glasgow, so things are good.
So how have you been finding lockdown then?
Lockdown's been so difficult. As someone that is always on the head of the road, like I since I was 17, I haven't really stopped, touring or doing something or being at uni or being away, and being in one place for 3 4 months just been such a shock to the system. It's like when I put my suitcase away and I realized I wasn't going to go to Australia or Denmark or anywhere, there was like a sense of grief and mourning, so it's been so difficult.
Yeah, and it's I've been kind of similar because I've just moved back from spending probably near about 8 years in Australia, and the last couple of years has just been constantly just kind of on the road, gigging and that, and then you come back, and then all of a sudden that's kind of shut down. You're on lockdown, but it's really good to see how like social media has been really important. There's been that kind of I find it hard as a musician to kind of use social media for what to help you because it is a necessity, and then balance that with the kind of how easy it is to get sucked in. How have you found things like Patreon and live gigs and Facebook Live and things like that?
I think it is the necessary evil. I mean, having a live stream gig on Facebook is not nearly going to come as close to what the atmosphere would be in a folk club, and Abdi's singing the songs, back at you, and there's just that atmosphere. There's been some people who have just put out releases saying that they're not going to be doing live streams for that reason, that it's not the atmosphere that they want. But for me, um, being able to keep my head above the water and to teach via Patreon and to utilize all these platforms is really important financially. So I've been doing it, but I have been feeling that I've missed the live action feel of what a gig feels like.
Do you think once, if or when things start to go back to that kind of normality and we start playing gigs again, do you think this aspect of social media, like live streaming, live tuition, is that something yourself or you see music keep that focus on, or will it make that switch fully back to that live experience?
This is a conversation that so many music organisations, especially in the trad world, like the Trad Music Forum, are having right now. That we think that yes, it will continue to be a large part of how we work using social media and using live streams or Patreon or online tuition. I think that it is going to continue, and also it's going to reshape the way that we treat work and we treat touring. But I think now that people's realised that it can be done, I think that it will happen. I mean, I've had the lovely opportunity to be teaching a woman in Miami, Florida, and I think I'll continue to do that. I think it's a really great thing, but it is a substitute, I guess, for the real thing, but it's not going to come close to the real thing.
There's something about, having the choice between, because there's that argument that now you've got the live stream gigs for free, why are people going to pay for them? But I think ultimately there's such a big difference between watching someone play on your phone screen with this crappy audio quality and crackles and static to being there in a live audience with the atmosphere. And it's exciting to kind of get live music back, and especially now that pubs are looking to reopen in the next couple of months. I don't know how soon gigs, well, where live music ranks on the priorities, but yeah, as you say, like being able to do things like teaching with people from America, or it's definitely something that opens up more potential in the long run. And I think it's forced a lot of musicians to really look at social media in that light. There's a lot of people who are a lot of musicians who are a bit critical of social media because they don't want to get sucked in. But I think, you know, this lockdown's forced people to kind of look into it and how it can be a benefit. And as you say, in the long run, it is a necessary evil ultimately. Um, yeah. So sorry again.
I'm just going to say what I have been doing with my live stream is suggesting like a ticket donation. So if they want to watch the live stream, I'll put like the ticket donation up on Bandcamp like the day before or something, and people who can afford to can like buy a ticket via Bandcamp. And people tend to do that and support musicians in this really difficult time. So necessarily, some people are actually paying to watch these live streams, which is a cool thing, and it's really helped me. Likewise, it's free to watch anyway. It's out on Facebook, so if people are struggling, then there's no barrier to access that music.
Is it that you're doing live gigs? Is it something you're worried about overdoing, or are you kind of just, you know, a night a weekly kind of thing?
Well, my main like official live stream gigs have been on my own Facebook page, and I've done those once a month, really, and that's been like an hour and a half gig or so. So I've tried to limit that to kind of once a month, and have been kind of taking advantage of the fact that Bandcamp have been, um, you know, getting rid of their revenue fees for artists. So I'll put the ticket link up when the Bandcamp day is, so that it's there's maximum value for money for me to do it, but also people will know that their ticket will go straight to me and not to all Bandcamp, PayPal, and all that. So I would say maybe like once a month for the 1 hour and a half gigs. But then there's other little pages and all that that are asking people to do live streams, and you don't really have the ability to monetize it. So of course I've been doing those, but I'm been kind of putting up PayPal, tip jars or merch links and all that. It's really difficult because there has been an influx of kind of local musicians and all that doing things on local pages. And whenever a musician who is a professional musician who makes their sole income through touring puts up like a PayPal link, everyone's like, hold on, why, what's this happening?
Yeah.
So it's quite difficult to explain in some circuits that this is your work and you've lost all of it. Whereas the whole live stream thing, a lot of kind of people who are doing music for fun or for hobbies are kind of getting involved. So it means that people who are really struggling to make their income right now, when they ask for like a wee donation or buy a CD, it's just sometimes it's not happening. So it's quite difficult to explain and articulate that this is what you do for an actual living, and all of it's been cancelled, and you don't have any gigs until October, November, December. Like, just because lockdown ends doesn't mean that I'm going back to work anytime soon. All of my gigs abroad have been cancelled. I don't tend to do pub gigs anyway. Just the type of music that I sing doesn't necessarily work in a rowdy pub. I prefer a much quieter, sit down, folk clubby atmosphere, art centre vibe. So pubs and clubs won't really necessarily help me if they
Mm.
open. Um, but like people just don't realise that actually the gigs that you had aren't just going to float back once lockdown's over. Like the gigs abroad aren't going to be rescheduled anytime soon because of Brexit.
Yeah. Unfortunately, our gigs are quiet, but they tend to be for the the wrong reasons. But I find that what you said about when you post on Facebook with the links, it's funny because like I've not done a lot of live stream gigs, but I've been like for a time I was posting like a folk song a day. I was doing that every day for about like
Nice.
6 or so weeks, and you'd share them to these big kind of like the Facebook pages that have been set up. And like you'll post your video and you kind of explain what you do and the fact that you do this full time and that your income's gone, and that just kind of gets drowned out between, and then that'll get like three likes, and then you'll see someone in the living room singing karaoke like that, and then that's like 300-400 likes, and it's weird how it's kind of, it's great that people who do music as a hobby, they found that kind of release, because that's why everyone gets into music. But at the same time, it has been a struggle for a lot of professional musicians to kind of get like jump over, like kind of push through that barrier of not being mixed up with that same kind of group. So when you are looking for donations that are going to keep you afloat, it's very hard to break past that crowd who's saying, well, I've just seen 10 videos from other musicians, singing in the house, they don't want a penny. And you're asking for, donations. Like, why should I, regardless of quality? So yes, I get your point there. And yeah, and that's it as well. As soon as things open up, it's not going to be a case of, oh well, now the pubs are open and the venues are open, we're going to book a gig this weekend, come down, because there's so much time to promote and to get tickets out there. And just till venue, like, we don't know what kind of position venues are going to be, whether they're going to be putting on as many gigs as they are, until they start getting money back into the business. So it's a bit of a strange kind of time around that, and it's something that's hard to plan for. Do you have any kind of rough idea of what your plan is once things kind of go back to that normal, or are you just going to see?
Well, I think it is really difficult because when venues reopen, they're going to be thinking about profits. They're going to be thinking of what can we do to, get back and to keep our heads above the water. And they will be booking primarily acts that they know are going to sell out that venue so that they can make a bit of money back. Then again, the acts aren't going to want to have all their tours at the same time, so they're in direct competition. So there will be small spaces for the underdogs like me to maybe get a gig back. But the thing is that the whole of next year is gone. We're not going to be adding new gigs next year because they're rescheduled from this year. So the financial impact will stretch until 2022 effectively, because the gigs that we're going to do next year are not going to be new. They're going to be the rescheduled ones for this year, if they will be rescheduled. Some project-based ones are just pure cancelled for me and I won't have them back. Some things have changed dates, so I'm going to lose even more gigs because I won't be able to like reschedule them at the same time. So it's kind of like, and not to be pessimistic, it's not actually going to be that easy to get everything like back to normal and to reschedule all these gigs. But saying that, social distancing might still happen in these venues. Venues aren't going to be new ones, aren't going to, new gigs for the personal act. They're not going to be wanting to take risks on not as established acts. They're going to be wanting to get big sellout shows. So that is going to narrow the market even further for people who are really just trying to build their career. And it's really scary because the whole Brexit thing means that, I mean, I lost most of my work in Europe and Denmark and Sweden and Germany. That's going to be much harder to reschedule because we have no clue what the financial implications of Brexit is going to be. So it's not just a case of we'll move all these European dates to 2021 because we have no clue what the landscape is going to be like.
And as you say, like, there's a lot of festivals that were planned for this summer. They've already kind of announced their dates for next year, but kind of using the lineup that they was going to go with this year anyway. So for if you were looking to get at festivals that you weren't able to play this year, as you say, you've got to wait that extra year. I think personally that it's time that the government really needs to value the arts and put funding into it and make sure musicians are staying afloat, because there is that kind of general mindset that, oh, the arts aren't that important, it's just a hobby. Yet lockdown has shown, if lockdown has shown us anything, it's how reliant people are on the arts. How, like, people, loads of people have been tuning into live streams now, or watching musicians play. Everyone's watching Netflix as a way to get through the grind because they can't go out. If there's a time that the arts need funding, it's now. And unfortunately, because of the government that we have, they don't put that kind of value into the arts. It's kind of difficult to see how the average musician who isn't a stadium sellout act is going to just try and progress and make this their living, because it's, as much as music is a hobby, it's for myself, and I imagine yourself as well, it's one of the few things that you can see yourself doing. So the thought of doing something else because this isn't available, it's just not an option for a lot of people. um how did, like, I don't is the way that Scotland's, like, the government in Scotland help musicians different to the, like, the Tory input over here, or is there more in terms of government grants or support on offer, or do you have to look to private organisations for that?
So what is really scary is that the Musicians Union conducted a research, investigation on this, and they found that 19% of musicians are considering leaving the sector completely, which is so scary, because considering some of those musicians might have put themselves into student debt, going to conservatoires, getting degrees in music like I have, and have built up their businesses and built up their careers, and they're just thinking of just abandoning it completely. That's so scary. I feel like the UK government just do not care for the arts. Historically, I feel like Britain didn't care for the arts as much as other countries per se. I know that in France there's great schemes for musicians, and in some places there's top ups for for musicians' income. Right now, Ireland is given like a basic universal income. New Zealand has just announced a huge packet for the arts. What's our country doing? In Scotland, there is devolution, yes, and that has allowed Creative Scotland to create the Creative Scotland Bridging Bursary, which has given musicians grants up to £2,500, which is amazing considering some musicians will not get that from the self-employed income support scheme that the UK government has been on offer. So yeah, there has been some good initiatives that the Scottish government has ran, but being a devolved nation, there's not, that's as far as we can go
Yeah,
really.
because ultimately it all depends on the funding that they're getting from Westminster, which, if as it's shown, it's Westminster's main focus is on itself, and and arts isn't a priority for them. I know in Australia, there is a support package there for musicians, as a kind of a weekly, or fortnightly supplement, which has helped a lot of musicians I know there. And it is sad when you are in the UK, and you're looking at other countries and what they're doing to support the arts, and you see what's available for yourself, and there isn't much. And that the supplement that you said, the £2,500, is great, but there needs to be more from the government for long-term sustainability, because these one-off cash injections are great for the short term, but when you're looking at, as you said, 2 years time before you can get a regular kind of gigging structure again, then how do you budget, how do you work, how do you plan your business? Because ultimately a musician, it is a business, and you have to set it up the same way anyone would set any kind of business up. Everyone's looking long term and how to get back on the feet, and a lot of businesses do have that government support, except for if you're in the arts. Yeah, so it's quite sad, but to try and put some optimism into it, it's I think, because there's so many musicians who have been doing these things on social media, like live stream. Hopefully the public are realizing how important music is and how much musicians are struggling, and they do put their hands in the pockets once, when we need their help.
I do think that is a great thing that people are being so generous, but it would be so lovely to not rely on donations
Mm.
from the public. I think it is really sad. And myself, I had a knee surgery in December 2019, which means that for me, I haven't had a consistent income since November 2019 till at least October 2020, because by the time I went back to work, COVID happened. I got about two abroad gigs before COVID happened. After the whole knee surgery, it was quite funny. Like the minute I got back to work, that was it. Just no work anymore. It's really scary. I would just rather have a better support from the government, and also some musicians who are saving up to create new music, create new albums, will have project funding, which means that they've got that money in the bank waiting to create an album. and that means that because they have that, they won't be able to be eligible for universal credit. So I know a lot of musicians who have been looking ahead about what they're going to do for their business in 2020. They've got that money there, you know, whether they've got it from an arts council or they've crowdfunded, it's in their bank, they have it, they're in control of it. But the government don't seem to realise that that's business money and not personal money. They can't just pay their rent with that money. That money is for a project-based thing that they've had funded, or you know, they've kickstarted or whatever. So many musicians are just not eligible for universal credit, and that is heartbreaking that they're having to dip into their vital business funds that's going to get them back going into work in order to live, pay their rent, and get food. It's just, it's heartbreaking.
Yeah, and then even with Brexit, no one's going to know what's going to happen with that fully. But with what the reports are saying, all of a sudden as with that freedom of movement that's not going to be available, we're going to have to look into visas. We're going to have to be looking into, potentially paying extra tax on if we're bringing merch across, and it's just all these extra expenses, which with the sustainability of being a musician anyway, it's just seems like extra pressure, which which musicians can't really, they don't have that room for. Which yeah, it's a tough one to talk about because ultimately we don't have a clue what's going to happen. I'm still quietly optimistic that with COVID now and with everything that's happened, there is some kind of reawakening and Brexit doesn't go through, because I think everyone kind of knows it's going to be such a disaster, but it's just kind of that stubbornness to push it through that's keeping it going. But realistically, yeah, what do you have kind of? Have you looked into it much? Like what's going to be available for you in terms of going to Europe?
Not really. We've just been hearing about the visas that other people are going to have to pay to come here. And likewise, the European nations are definitely going to put that visas on us to go there. Like, that's
Hmm.
just how it happens. There's just been so much animosity surrounding, you know, what's going to happen with Brexit. I thoroughly just don't think it should happen. And it's so sad because what happened with 2014, you know, Westminster told the people of Scotland, if you vote to be independent, you'll be out of Europe. But we're going to be out of Europe anyway now. So,
Yeah.
you know, our politics is based on lies and scaremongering. And it's really heartbreaking that my formative years as an activist and as a musician and as a folk musician, I've lived through that, and I've seen the blatant lies that's been spread and told around the country, and it's so heartbreaking that it's hard to make a living already. And Europe was, you know, I had built up my career to be able to tour in Europe. I mean, I'm 22. The first time I went abroad, I was with my band. I was 18 to Italy, and we just went, and that was so amazing. And to think that it could be as hard as going to America just to go to Europe is so scary. I just think that Brexit just should not happen.
Yeah, and I remember during the referendum campaign, like David Cameron was coming out saying, "Oh, we're better together. We're better together," and all of a sudden, when the UK take that argument with the EU, it's like, "No, we're better on our own. We're better on our own," and it's really sad. And like, if you look at humanity, the way that we go in, we should be making every conscious decision to bring ourselves closer together with other countries. So it just doesn't make sense to push Brexit ahead. As soon as we leave the EU, we take that one step further away from Europe, and we're cutting ties with so many countries and so many allies for ultimately what was a campaign that was built on lies. It was built on fear, and it's just it's sad that it's happened. It's sad that it's going ahead. The only kind of um, opportunity that I can see is it pushes Scotland to go back into that discussing the independence and taking that route. So that they can have control, because ultimately, and I think this, I feel the same about the northwest of England as well, because like there's so many places here that voted Conservative for the Tories in the last election, on false promises, and their track record for the Tories in the northwest is appalling. There's no funding. There's so much poverty. There's so much people unemployed, and there's so many people on food banks, and they just don't care. And it's the same in Scotland. I lived up in Edinburgh for 6 months about 8 years ago, and it was generally that same kind of attitude towards the government. Then it's like they don't care. They don't put enough funding into it, and it's all take, and it's not enough giving. So if anything was good was to come out of Brexit, hopefully it does give Scotland that chance to take that independence and to start having control over their own country, because the same issues that are happening in the northwest of England and around a lot of England are happening up there as well.
Yeah, totally. I mean, in terms of like the north of England and Northumbria and, the debated lands and all that, I feel like we're kind of politically in the same realm as them. And it is very sad. But I mean, naturally, we traded with the Baltic. The northeast of Scotland traded with Baltic nations and Scandinavia, and that kind of has been destroyed by the union with the United Kingdom. I mean, if you look historically, there was a lot of ties that we had that now don't exist. It is very sad, and I think that this will be the catalyst to the breakup of the union, whether that be in 10 years or 50 years. And I think that as a musician who has been quite political and quite public with what I think since I was maybe 16, 17, I think that it's quite welcome, so that we can have control over taxation and we can have control over immigration. Scotland currently has no control over immigration. So whilst there's big kind of pretty much racist lorries going about, London with things like keep people, close our borders, Scotland does not speak for that, and does not speak for closing borders. And I think that we're being spoken for us, and having a voice and having an identity is very important. And it's the same with the Scots language. Like, people don't realise that we have three national languages in Scotland: Gaelic,
Oh,
Scots, and English. And like, our culture and our identity is sometimes just not shining through. And I guess it would be the same with Wales. But I've recently been involved in a campaign called Iona Fyfe, which launched yesterday, which is about getting legal recognition for the Scots language, which is really exciting,
wow.
because Gaelic got recognised as an official language in 2005, which is not too long ago. But English, of course, is our primary spoken language in Scotland, and the second most spoken language is Scots. The language, with 1.5 million people identifying as speaking Scots in the 2011 census. And then the third most spoken language is Gaelic. Gaelic is recognised, but Scots isn't, because so many people don't understand that it's a real language, it's a written language, it's an oral language. And that's kind of what I've been up to over lockdown, helping to rebrand this Ur Vice, which means Our Voice campaign. And that launched yesterday, which is really exciting. And that's lobbying the Scottish government to recognise our own language, which is quite scary. But the Scots language is recognised as a vulnerable language by UNESCO, and is recognised as a regional dialect in the UK government. So if we can get the Scottish government to actually create a language board and give us a Scots Language Act, that's similar to the Gaelic Act, and that's going to help our identity as a nation and our culture as well. Because you can do a degree in Scottish song or Scots song, which is singing in Scots, yet Scots isn't recognised as a legal language. So it's funny. It's very funny that we don't have a language act. Ulster Scots, I believe, is getting one, which will most likely catalyse Scots to get one. But that's what I've been up to in my time in lockdown, being able to lend my hand to that campaign, which is really, really exciting.
Have you found a lot of issues when approaching the Scottish government about lobbying for that, or have they been generally quite supportive with it? Or?
A huge issue is that people believe that the Scots language is a nationalist agenda, which it is backed by many nationalists. It's also backed by many conservatives who believe the Scots language should be recognised. It's actually a cross-party cause. So the issue that we've had is that we're trying to depoliticise it, and people are still politicizing it, and still there's a lot of unionists who'll attack the Scots language on Twitter, seeing it as like a nationalist agenda. So whilst over here in Scotland we're trying to depoliticise the Scots language, unfortunately Ulster Scots comes from politicising the Scots language in Ulster. So we're trying to kind of break away and be like, no, this is a cross-party cause. We have Conservative members who are very passionate about getting it recognised. We also have nationalists who are happy with getting it recognised. It's a cross-party thing. So the main issue is that people have had like an abrasiveness against it, thinking that Scots language equals the nationalist agenda, where in reality it doesn't. 1.5 million people in Scotland identify as speaking Scots, and that was the 2011 census. So next year the census might be completely different. There might be way more who now understand Scots more and who might identify as speaking Scots more. So, but that 1.5 million people are not all members of the SNP. Certainly not. Some will be members of the Greens or Labour or Lib Dem. I think we're trying to depoliticise it, whereas some people are trying to politicise it in the highest regard. So that's the main stumbling block that we're having.
Surely, the idea of recognizing this language is no different to kind of recognizing folk tales or folk songs. It's part of a country's identity and a part of its culture, and just because it promotes that country, it shouldn't it shouldn't really be labeled as nationalist because of it. It's part of a country's history. It's part of a culture. Um, yeah, and there's I can't see why there would be any difference in recognizing that than to recognizing the folk tales or the folk songs or the music of the country. It for me it goes hand in hand really.
Absolutely. And saying that, we do have Conservative MPs such as Peter Chapman who have spoken in the Scots Parliament in Doric, in Scots, and have addressed the Parliament not in English. Some people in the UK Parliament have taken their oath in Scots. So when you're sworn into Parliament, you can take the oath in Welsh, Gaelic, English, and now people are taking it in Scots to try and raise the profile. And I think that it's good that we're getting that recognition, but I think we just need more. Like, I'm not saying we need Scots on the street signs like we have Gaelic and Welsh on the street signs. I'm not saying that. I don't think we should divert funds that way, but we need like a language board which is set up in order to promote that language too. Because I've been abroad so many times, and I've done like an hour and a half gig, and I've been like, this song's in Doric, this is the native dialect of Aberdeenshire, but it's part of the Scots language, and folk Fiaour speak the Scots language. And I'll literally feed that through in the entire gig, 1 hour and a half. And then after the gig, someone will write a review or they'll come up to me and say, was that Gaelic? I'm like, no, Scots has 3 national languages. And being from the East Coast, that most people speak Scots there. In the West Coast and up the Highlands and Islands, people speak Gaelic there. And in the borders, people speak Scots. And it stretches all the way down to Newcastle. Geordie is effectively like the dialect is very similar. Some of the words are the same in Geordie as they are in Doric. So bairn, like we share that word. Bairn means child in both Geordie and in Doric, well, and in Scots. Wayne, bairn. We share our dialects with some Norse words as well, like Kirk. So it's such a distinct culture, but it's also universal at the same time. And yeah, so lockdown, I've been kind of using this time to fight for that campaign, because it's really important to not let it slip out of the government's agenda whilst there's so many different stuff going on right now.
Yeah, definitely. And it kind of leads me into something I wanted to ask you about is with when you look at these old folk songs, these are stories from hundreds and hundreds of years ago. like some of them. And when you link that with what you're doing with the language, is it something that's about preserving the past and the culture, or does it still have a relevance to today's society?
Mhm. Well, I'd respond to that with something called the carrying stream. And people refer to the carrying stream as this idea that tradition is ever moving. It's consistently evolving and molding and changing. So, whilst it is about preserving that authenticity and integrity of the traditional song or the traditional ballad, it's also about moving the carrying stream along in order for it to be acceptable and accessible in a universal and modern day society. So, yes, I would say tradition is a thing that is ever molding. And for me, I'd like to introduce more and more people to Scots song and the Scots ballads than before. And you can only really do that by innovating upon tradition. For example, the child ballads, people don't realize that 91 out of 305 of them alone come directly or indirectly from Aberdeenshire. That's a huge whopping, like that's almost a third of
Yeah.
this pioneering ballad collection. So the rest of them will come from all over the world and all over, England and Wales and Ireland and whatever, but 91 of them have been found to have been directly or archetypically from Aberdeenshire, which is a huge thing because I would be able to like leave my house at home and I could drive up to places where the stuff took place. So for example, Andra Lamy, which is a great ballad recorded by Martin Simpson and recorded by lots and lots of different folk. I could go, 5-10 miles from Huntly, go up to Fyvie and like see the history and stand where these people stood. I could go up to the Battle of Harlaw. I could go to, Auchindoun Castle or, where Anarchy Gordon and all that took place, where Glenloggie took place. Like a lot of these ballads are, in situ voiced in Aberdeenshire because they physically took place there. So it's very special to be able to do that. And I know that I'm not singing about a far off land. I'm singing about where I grew up. And I can go and sing the song where it happened. And that's such a privilege. Not everyone has that. It's such a privilege to grow up in that place. Living in Glasgow now, I definitely would rather be in Aberdeenshire.
Yeah, oh, that's fantastic, and it's I think that what you just mentioned, it draws upon something that that I really love about folk music is the fact that it is kind of that it's that time machine that you listen to these songs that some of them go back to like 500-600 years old, and you just sense that as soon as you listen to these songs, you feel that you're back there in that time. You can see what that person was singing about. You can see the land the way it was, and the stories, and the joys and the sorrows that these songs feel. And it is almost like a vessel into that other world. And then when you go to these places that the songs are about, it's just that kind of very surreal feeling of being there, knowing the songs and knowing the stories, and it kind of elevates that song. It's more than just a set of lyrics. It's more than a song. It's actual history that just happened to be written down this way. And there's for me a lot of with a lot of folk songs, there's no difference to them as a piece of history than reading a history book about the Second World War or anything really. It's just as a legitimate source of history, and especially when you listen to these songs, it's yeah, it does have that emotion over you, which I think for me is what drew me into it. What was your kind of path into folk music?
Well, when I was much, much younger, I was 5 years old, and my whole family are quite musical. My extended family, not my immediate, so my mum and dad aren't very musical, but they took me to Keith Festival. Keith is in Morayshire, and it was run by something called the Traditional Music and Song Association of Scotland, which I'm now a national director of. And I went there, and I was 5, and I learnt up a wee poem, and I won the Doric poetry under 6. So the first ever time I performed at like a folk festival or a traditional festival, I was just reciting poetry in the dialect. And then I met kind of at the prize giving concert at night, which you go to if you've won a medal or something. you get to sing or meet or do your little party piece, and you can meet all the people who won in the other categories. So I met singers, and they were saying, oh, you're small and cute, you're wee, here's someone new, let's get them involved. And they encouraged me to like learn a traditional ballad, because the only difference from a Doric poem to a ballad that's in Doric is the melody. And I was like, okay. So I kind of I was really young, so I took a few years to figure out how I would sing, and I kind of went back to consistently do the poetry and then the piano and different, it was kind of like a competition festival with sing-arounds and, folk songs and everything. And then I would just keep on going back, and then I would go to folk clubs in my teenage years, and my kind of mum and dad would take me and kind of leave me at folk festivals for the whole weekend. And then I decided that I realized there was a degree that you could do in this music. I mean, I stuck in at school because, I came from a place in Aberdeenshire where we didn't have that much money, and my parents separated, and it was a work hard and do good and leave this place and go and do something with your life and, make them proud. So I stuck in at school. And then I realized, oh, you know what, I'll audition to this conservatoire, because they, similar, there's a Newcastle course where they do a degree in music, in folk music, traditional music. There's also a degree in the Leeds College of Music that you can study folk music. But in Scotland, where we don't have to pay tuition fees, the degree for traditional music was at the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland in Glasgow. So I auditioned there when I was 16, and I really had the advantage of, I knew people who had recorded these songs in the 60s because they came to all the folk festivals that I went to. So I kind of grew up listening to people who were well-known folk singers from the revival that other people had only heard in vinyl or whatever. So I had the advantage of knowing these singers and learning songs off them and learning repertoire and being able to source properly and utilize folk song collections. So at 16, that was quite quite advanced for someone to be able to have this deep understanding of tradition and what it means to retain tradition yet move it on. So I auditioned and I got in. I thought, I'm never good. If I defer this year, I'll never get in again. So I just took it and I left Huntly to move to Glasgow when I was 17, and I kind of I'm stuck here basically. That's it. I entered the Young Traditional Musician of the Year, and I got to the final in 2017 when I was 19, and that really kickstarted my career because it was such a high profile thing. So I got a lot of gigs like that and kind of ran with it. I never won it, but at the end of the day, when you look at X Factor and The Voice and all that, the folk that win it, and they go off and do amazing things, but sometimes it's the people that never won it, they work really, really hard and carry on the momentum that was built. So that was a great competition to do the BBC Young Traditional Musician of the Year. I loved doing it, and it really helped my career. And then I just stuck with it and toured whilst I was studying, which presented a lot of problems being able to complete the degree whilst in the back of a tour van in Austria. But I loved it, and it was fun, and that's how I kind of got into it. And I didn't really, when I was like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, I didn't think, oh, I'm going to be a professional folk singer. I didn't realize that was a thing. Didn't realize that you could be a professional folk singer until I realized there was degrees in them. And when I was 15, I was really kind of edging to maybe do politics at uni or something. I was very interested in my history and modern studies. So I'd say that if it wasn't for an impulsive, I'm going to apply to the conservatoire, I'd probably be in a very different career path right now.
Do you think there was kind of an underlying moment that led you towards gearing to like, right, this is music, this is what I'm going to be doing now? Like, was there ever a moment where that kind of clicked into place, or was it more of an evolving kind of you eventually just kind of fell into it, and before you knew it, you was doing music full time?
I think it wasn't like I fell into it. There was like a lot of things that happened that made it very natural. It was like a natural progression. It wasn't like I woke up one day and was like, right, here's my aim, I'm going to do it. It was more like, oh, I'll go do this folk festival and then this folk club. And then, by the time I was 15, I was starting to get like bookings, throughout Scotland. I was thinking, oh, this is cool. I wonder if I can do this full time, and then you realize, oh, there's a course, or there's other people that are making a living off this. So it was very natural. Like there was no agenda in my learning about the tradition. I mean, I feel like sometimes. I mean, I'm actually that this podcast is being created by standing up my iPhone on a Greg Duncan folk song collection book. Like
Uh,
there was I was always having that interest in my local history and my local dialect or where I came from and my identity without having the agenda that that would become my USP as a folk singer, to represent this tradition. So it was all very natural. I feel like sometimes nowadays there's a lot of young people who are thinking, oh, I like this folk music, but they're not really looking at the collections, the ballad collections, the link and the vis-a-vis to their own tradition and own identity. Instead, they've just typed in folk awards to YouTube, or they've typed in young trad to YouTube, and they've seen all the performances of other people and they've been inspired that way.
mm.
I mean, that is fine, but I'd like them to be able to look at the collections and look at their history and look at tradition bearers and be inspired by other things as well as just the flashy performances that you sometimes get to do. I'd like them to be able to have that link to tradition and create that link if they don't have it. Be able to say, look in a ballad collection, think, oh, I know that place. I could visit that and I could check out how it is. I think that there's a lot more to be done than just learning a few songs and learning how to sing. It's about having, your identity and integrity and a voicing of place and, a link to what you believe in. And I like that.
Why do you think that kind of feeling is stronger in Scotland, Ireland, and Wales? You know, that link to tradition, that pride, especially when you look at kind of English folk music. Although it's kind of, it had that revival and it's kind of going through a bit more of a revival now. But when you look at it on the mainstream, there isn't that kind of national pride about English folk music or English folk tradition. Whereas maybe I might be wrong, but as an outsider looking in, Ireland has that really proud folk heritage and about their tradition, and Scotland does, and Wales does as well.
I've got to say it's about, there's traditions that came from oppression. For example, mouth music and Push to Beal, like Gaelic mouth music, that came from the tradition. That tradition came and evolved because the British banned playing instruments and playing pipes. So they decided for people to dance, they would make music with their mouth. So there's direct traditions which came directly from oppression, and that perhaps feeds into a lot about national identity and why we're so proud of our songs and our stories and our music. I don't know if that's the answer that you were looking for, but I
No,
think
yeah,
it's one of the reasons as to why in these particular nations they're so passionate about our culture, because it was oppressed quite strongly.
yeah, and it's hard to see because when you look at the oppression of these countries, and you look at a lot of the mining songs that were really popular in the northwest and northeast of England, all these songs that were sung by workers who were taken for granted, exploited, and left with nothing, and that kind of pride, that working class pride, which was so strong, over the last 100 years, it's gone now. And I think the songs here in England have been kind of lost with them. There's a big kind of faux power about the working class now. It's kind of that like shame, and I think that could be one of the reasons of many that I think England in particular, it has that kind of image it wants to set out for itself as this, this great empire, that whole thing with that, which is just a facade really, but because that's the image they kind of present themselves, the actual real history and the real stories of working class people that a lot of the folk music comes from and a lot of the traditions come from, that's kind of been lost or buried intentionally or just through time. But it is, I look at countries, like Scotland and Ireland, quite envious that do have that kind of pride about their identity, which is why campaigns about, bringing the language, recognizing that as a language is great as well, because it's another step forward into, not so much reclaiming, but just being proud about your national identity. It shouldn't always be, if you can recognize all the wrongs that the country's does, but highlight, the great things about that as well. That's it shouldn't always necessarily be linked with nationalists.
Yeah, I mean, there's actually, speaking about mining songs, there's some great ones that are still sung in folk clubs that I still have the pleasure of hearing. And especially ones that were written by like Ed Pickford or something. And there's great Scots mining songs too, because we had quite a big mining community
Mm.
in Fife in the east of Scotland. And I feel like yeah, maybe people are maybe gearing towards like more contemporary music now in the mainstream. Like years and years ago, after the UK news, there was a thing called like Hootenanny, where where singers and musicians would get like airplay after the national news. People like Jimmy McGregor and Robin Hall would play on everyone's TVs, and that was the popular music of the times. And folk music was popular um, as like the main type of music that we were exposed to. But now that's all changed. But I feel like there's definitely some Scottish cringe as well. There's parts of our tradition that we're all quite cringy about. And I guess like no one should be cringy about our anyone's tradition or that. And I really like the fact that there's still songs, but there's definitely great songs out there about the working class, and they're definitely still being sung in folk clubs and all that, whether they're being recorded on hit selling CDs. That doesn't exist, but like there's great protest singers like Green Polar and all that, like absolutely wonderful, that I definitely look up to.
And do you think that we're in danger of kind of losing that folk tradition with regards to the direction mainstream music's taken? It's very much about a business model, that kind of mass production. Is that going to drown out that interest in traditional music, or do you think with things like Spotify making it easier to access, we're going to experience that kind of second revival?
Well, the idea of a second revival really confuses me, because the idea of the carrying stream is that a revival never started or ended. It was just consistently going on and chugging on with ebbs and flows. So when I talk about first revival and second revival, I understand that there is times and dates which apply to both. But within the carrying stream, it's the idea that there was never the end of a revival, if you get what I mean. It was always going onwards. But I don't know. I think that the people who enjoy folk music and traditional music, they enjoy it perhaps because their mum and dad enjoyed it. Their mum and dad took them to the folk club and they still enjoy it, or there's new people who are entering into the tradition, and they've explored. They've started going to their local Morris side, or they've started going to their local folk club, having absolutely no background in it. I think that's still happening, which is really healthy. I mean, we actually have a Morris side in Aberdeenshire. It's the Bankery Morris Man. It's really cool. So there is shared tradition and
Yeah.
shared interest within Scotland and England, and I absolutely love that. But I think that people are still coming into it through different avenues because social media is so strong. I don't think, like, the thing is that there's all people aren't going to like ditch folk music because they like Ariana Grande. Like, I think we have so much choice and scope that we can like traditional ballads and folk music, but also like Taylor Swift. Like, I grew up listening to metal music, musical theatre music, country music. I mean, right now I probably listen to more country music than folk music, but that doesn't stop me from singing a traditional ballad. I think that having choice and scope allows us to like more things, and that's really healthy, I think.
I think with what you were saying earlier about like adding new things to like presenting tradition in a new way, I think having those external influences from other genres definitely helps bring these older songs in a new light that hasn't been heard before. Um, what's kind of been the biggest obstacles you've had to overcome, like on your musical journey?
I would say funding. Like, I really struggled to find money to make my first album, because most of my career had taken place whilst I was still a student. And that means that you can't apply for most funds, I think. I think there's some Creative Scotland funds that you can't apply to if like you're a student, or people, there's separate funds that say you can't be in full-time education if you're applying to this fund. So I really struggled to like fund my first album. I made like an Indiegogo at the end of it, which was cool, but I think that was difficult. But also, being, I was really, really young when I started, like 15, 16, 17, 18, and like being a young female that young, like in your teens, and then you're trying to find bands to tour with, and like you're, getting guitarists to come work with you and all that. I think it was more like I had to work harder to be respected, because I was so, I went to uni when I was 17. I was almost the youngest in my year. I felt like I had to work doubly hard to be respected because of my age.
Right. And how long did that kind of go on for, like experiencing that difficulty with the age barrier?
I feel like it went on to my second year of uni. So I worked really hard to my first year of uni to create like an EP and do some touring over the summer. And I entered the Young Traditional Musician of the Year, and I got through to the final. So when I came back after the summer holidays, after my first year of uni, and I came back, I feel like people started kind of respecting me more, being like, oh, she's actually spent her whole first year, not going out drinking until all hours, like staying home and working and rehearsing and creating, music. That I feel like people kind of respected me more for the work that I did and the results that I got out. I feel like that kind of was a changing point. But the thing is the people that I work with musically always respected me. They always took time to listen to me. People like Luke McNally and Aidan Moody and Charlie Gray and all that. I've known them for years. I knew Charlie since I was 16. But like I feel like they always respected me musically because they gave me the time of day to sing to them and to explain my ideas to them. It was more my peers at university that I feel like they thought I was like the young one, or like, inexperienced or something. I feel like I had to prove a lot to them to be noticed or recognized, or yeah. And I feel like after that first year that I spent the entire year working and then the entire summer gigging, and I went back for term for the second year of term, having this, the beginnings of a career, I feel like that's when people kind of start taking me seriously. And that's kind of rubbish, because everyone should be taken seriously at the outset. If someone says, I want to make an EP, I'm a singer, I'm a musician, would you like to work with me? Or hi, we're a peer, we're in uni together, we're at conservatoire together. I feel like everyone should be off the mark taken seriously. And just because you're a tiny bit younger than everyone else, you shouldn't have to work harder to be taken seriously or as seriously as everyone. But of course, I feel old now, and there's folk singers from Aberdeenshire who are literally like 15 and they're amazing, and it's very healthy. The scene is very healthy.
That's good, yeah, because that kind of new generation of youngsters who are taking up the genre just kind of helps keep that tradition going.
And they're
How
all so good. They're all so amazing. But we
that's
have great education programs. We have the Fashion and Gale movement, the Face Ross movement, the TMSA movement, like workshops and plenty. Like there's a healthy education network in Scotland that if you want to learn a traditional instrument and your mum and dad have no clue, then you can go to these courses, and you can go to these like face weekends and residencies. It's so healthy and it's so, so good.
Yeah, because it's I think you're never too old, you're never too young. Like age shouldn't be a factor in what you can offer. Like young people have changed the world in a variety of ways, and it should be no different to a 15-year-old boy or girl wanting to do something and be taken seriously. You look at Greta Thunberg, what she's been able to achieve at such a young age. She's changed the way the entire world approaches environmental issues.
Mm.
And it just goes to show that it really doesn't matter how old you are or how young you are. It's about what you can offer, and hopefully more that's nurtured and that's supported. I was fortunate to have a supportive family with music, and it's just making sure that people, if recognize, and school systems recognize where that person's interests and talents lie, and making sure that they're not killing that enjoyment and talent, and they're nurturing it and supporting them to do it. What kind of doubt did you experience when you was it must be hard trying to achieve something at a young age and having people kind of not take you seriously. Like, how did you manage to kind of overcome that doubt?
Yeah, like I remember like some people I was trying to work with, like publicists, were like, "Who are you? Maybe we can get you on the Women's Hour." Like, what? Like, so I
Yeah.
definitely experienced stuff like that, which was kind of rubbish. And I feel like maybe if I approached the same, people now, they wouldn't have said that to me because of age and experience. I think I got through that by just working hard, doing lots and lots of gigging, whether that be solo, duo, trio, band outfits, just like getting my name out there and like consistently, trying to keep a profile. But I still feel doubt, like all the time. Like even right now, I'm like, should I write something? Is it going to be meaningful? Like, has other people already done this? Like, what can I can easily just go and interpret a traditional ballad and put my heart and soul into it, but can I write? I haven't really written much. Like, I always have doubt in the work that I'm doing. And I think it's probably it's good to be vulnerable and it's good to show doubt. But even like now, which is like 5 or 6 years into my career, I just sometimes like wake up and I'm like, what's the point? What am I doing? Is this going to even is my body of work that I'm going to create even going to make an impact? Like, is it going to be relevant? Am I relevant? Have I been doing enough? Am I updating enough? Like, it's kind of like that, the necessary evil, I guess, but it's just like constantly, there is constant doubt, like in my head all the time, like every single day. So no, I haven't even gotten over that doubt at all, ever.
It's a tough industry. It's a tough thing to do, and I guess that's why so many people's mindset is, when you tell someone that you want to be a musician or you do music as a professional, their first kind of reaction is like, really, or is, how is always kind of a negative question in that the idea of being a musician isn't sustainable and there's so many issues that come with it. Do you find yourself being able to overcome the difficulties, or do you just kind of roll through them? Like, what is your kind of mental process for dealing with like these issues?
I think when it's good, it's great, and when it's bad, it's awful. Like, just graduating from uni last year meant that last year and this year was my like first ever year as a self-employed musician without being a student. I was self-employed whilst I was a student, but this is my first like, first tax year or so where it's just been like, that's it. I'm not a student anymore. I'm now a fully fledged professional musician. And when it's good and you're gigging and you're busy, that's great. But when you've had, a knee operation and a global pandemic has killed your work, is really bad, and it makes you question the sustainability of your career, which is why, of course, we hark back to 19% of musicians are considering leaving the industry. So yeah, when it's good, it's good, and when it's bad, it's really bad. And when it's bad, that's when people say, well, why did you become a musician? But when it's good, people are saying, oh, you're doing so well, you're gigging, you're so busy, you're all over the world. Like, it's funny. When you're doing good, people are like heralding to you, but when you're doing bad, people are saying, it's your own fault for being a musician.
It's the double-edged sword. Yeah, it's a funny game, and it's definitely a funny time to be talking about music because of we just there's so much uncertainty about what the future holds. So it's that kind of, it's not a general kind of ABC on how to get back to work, how to get, the new album done or the next gig done or the next tour arranged, because not only do we not know when venues are going to open, we don't know when, you know, the availability of being able to go to Europe is going to be as a holiday, let alone as on a professional basis. So it's a strange time. How are you coping with that mentally?
I'm not very well, I don't think. I think it's really good to be honest about this. Like, I think there's that longing to be away or to be traveling. Like, I don't like to be in the same place for any length of time at all. So this has been it's been difficult to do that. But it's more like the worry of like, what is things going to be like? Can I afford to be a musician anymore? And then I feel sad because I'm like, look at all those years of training and grafting and doing gigs that probably weren't worth the money, and hard things to try and build up your career, and then you feel, well, it's all been ripped. It's like it's like someone's pulled a rug from underneath your feet, and underneath your feet was the foundations which you stand on, and you've just been toppled all over, and you don't know when you're going to make money again. And yeah, it's just kind of sad because everyone has worked so hard to create their careers, and then for the most, the rug has been pulled from your feet.
And it's with 19% of musicians looking at leaving, it just that statistic is probably going to rise as the uncertainty goes on. Are you working on any releases that from home, or are you just looking at continuing with the tuition and live performances until you get a better idea of the future?
I was thinking of like doing a really, really stripped back, chilled out, like 3 or 4 songs just to release on Bandcamp, like my piano and like my microphone. But like, it's been such a learning curve with like technology. Oh my
Mm.
goodness. Like I've, yeah, done things that I've never done before. So maybe if I did that in the next month, that would be cool. But in terms of like professional grade recording, I would be needing to be in a studio with lots of people. I don't want to release an album that's just me and piano. It's not exciting. It's very
Mm.
not exciting, especially when you've been working with great musicians like Aidan Moody, who's now in Manran, Graham Rory, who's in Nos with Aidan, Charlie Gray, who's an amazing fiddler, like one of Scotland's best, young traditional fiddle players. Like when you get to work with all these great musicians, you're like, well, where's the fun in me being in my flat in Glasgow trying to make some music, just me and the piano? Like, I'd much rather be making a professional grade stuff with them. But for right now, yeah, I can maybe even do like a few tracks, just me and piano. But who knows? I don't feel very enthused. But I've been doing these
Yeah.
traditional ballad workshops on Patreon, which is quite fun. Because ultimately it means that I'll have a whole host of teaching materials, but they've been going out on Patreon, and people have been watching the video, the instructional video, and then learning ballads. And then I give them like background sheets with different interpretations of the ballads, and historical information and research that I've conducted. And it's really cool to do that, but it takes a lot of work. Like I find that, for example, if someone asks you to like send them 30 minutes of video recording, it takes so long to record it and edit it and like stitch it all together. And
Mm.
just like the work that you're doing right now is so all encompassing and tiring, even though it's less work than driving 7 hours sound check and doing a gig and then driving another 7 hours. Like it's less but it's more at the same time. But yeah, maybe I'll make an EP for like release in July or something, just me and piano, some stripped back covers, or even like a ballad or two. I don't really know, I'm kind of taking it week by week right now, which is probably healthy to do.
Yeah, I think so. It's very easy to get overwhelmed as when you look at everything you mentioned, and not really see where that light at the end of the tunnel is. And I think ultimately we just have to take it week by week, just focus on now and what we're doing, with these videos, with these live streams. It's just one performance at a time, one lesson at a time. I think if we do that, we might be able to come out of the lockdown with our sanity intact, and hopefully with a pathway to how to move our music career forward. Um, we'll be wrapping up very shortly. For anyone who's interested, I'll be linking the Patreon links in the description below, as well as Spotify and Bandcamp links to the music. Yeah, I just want to thank you very much for your time. I find it's weird that never have I had so much but so little free time. It seems like the more time you get to be able to do things, the less time you have to actually be able to do. I don't know whether that's a case of motivation or just wanting to sleep until the lockdown's over. But I know how difficult it can be to arrange to do something, whether it's a video like this or just recording a song or something, and then when it actually comes around to it, it's just like, oh, I'll do it tomorrow, because ultimately we've got so much time on our hands. But so little as well.
It's like we're all becoming Spanish, like mañana, mañana.
Yeah, yeah.
Like it's almost as if we've become horizontal and we're like we're gonna have little siestas in the afternoon, and yeah, it's kind of cool.
I'm not quite prepared for civilization returning to normality. I think it's going to take a while to give myself the motivation to get back into that swing.
Yeah, totally. That's totally healthy, I think. I think that's totally fine and it's really normal. And I think that if you were feeling, yes, I'm ready for motivation, I think that would be unhealthy. So I think it's totally fine to feel that way and I totally feel it as well.
No, Iona, thank you very much for your time and for sharing your stories and your passion of folk music as well. And I wish you the very best for the future. Hopefully, I think with a positive mindset and with actions set out, hopefully we can all kind of come away all right in the end. So we'll see how that goes, and hopefully we'll keep in touch, and we'll do another one of these videos in a year's, once Brexit's gone through and once the lockdown's over, to see how you're keeping on then. But thank you yet again, and enjoy the rest of your lockdown experience.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
No worries
Cheers.
at all. Thank you.
So find your soul and the world